I'm delighted now to introduce the next panel, which consists of the chairpersons from 4 leading organizations who also happen to be very active members of UNEP, as well as leaders within the sustainable finance space. This panel is entitled Europe at the Crossroads of Mainstreaming Sustainable Finance, and it will be moderated by Liesel van Ast, Deputy Head of UNEP. I will call you now to the stage. Thank you very much. Together with Ana Botín, Executive Chair of Santander, Antonio Huertas, Chair of MAPFRE, Carlos Torres Vila, Chair of BBVA, and José Ignacio Goirigolzarri, Chair of CaixaBank. Thank you very much. Please take your seats.
Thank you and welcome. So looking at the crossroads of sustainable finance in Europe, I think many of you already know that Europe is really at the forefront of regulatory developments to align private finance with the goals of the Paris Agreement. And cooperation is really critical in order to have the transition and a smooth transition across the economy to limit the average global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. So, of course, with this, there is an increasing risk of a backlash unless social considerations are also taken into account. And this, leaving no one behind, is really a central promise of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So this means eradicating poverty and reducing inequalities and vulnerabilities so that all people have the ability to fulfill their potential. Now, this is especially important in emerging markets where there's often high levels of inequality and also access to financing is more limited to adapt to the physical impacts of climate change, to achieve the net zero transition, and of course to finance the sustainable development goals. So at the same time, the opportunities are immense, and the opportunities for net zero low carbon transition, for achieving the sustainable development goals, and of course for reducing inequalities, it really amounts to trillions of dollars. And a recent report released last week, which shows initial progress towards the Paris Agreement, says that a real systemic shift is needed to align financial flows with low-carbon, climate-resilient development. Many financial institutions recognize this and, of course, are already aligning their strategies with the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. And they're retooling to fulfill their roles in financing, in underwriting, and advising their clients to support them on their transition towards a sustainable and inclusive economy. Now, financial institutions with net zero commitments are also starting to put the mechanisms in place to really make the financial flows consistent with the pathway to a low-carbon transition towards climate-resilient development. So here to share their strategic approaches for sustainable finance, we're delighted to have Carlos Torres Vila, the chairman of the board of directors of BBVA, chairman of the BBVA Foundation, and a member of the UNEP Leadership Council. José Ignacio Goirigolzarri, who is chairman of CaixaBank since 2021. Also Deputy Chairman of the Spanish Confederation of Savings Banks and Chairman of the Western Business School, the Garum Foundation, as well as the CaixaBank Dualiza Foundation. Antonio Huertas Mejías, Chairman of MAPFRE, Chairman of the Fundación MAPFRE, and also a member of UNEP's Leadership Council. He has served as MAPFRE CEO since 2012, and he's also a member of the Pan-European Insurance Forum, the European Financial Services Roundtable, the Geneva Association, and he chairs the Spain-Brazil Council Foundation. And of course, Ana Botín, Executive Chair of Banco Santander since 2014, and in 2023, Ana was also appointed Chair of the Institute of International Finance and Chair of the World Economic Forum International Business Council. So thank you for joining us today. So could you please share your sustainability considerations, how you're looking at sustainability strategically, what are the initiatives and achievements, and how do you see the key priorities moving forwards? Please.
Should I start?
Yes.
Well, first of all, good morning, and thank you for organizing the regional roundtable here in Madrid. It's a real pleasure to welcome you all and to have this very important convening. I would summarize the challenges we face into 3. There has been a lot said already by Teresa Rivera, our Vice President, and also by Eric. But I would summarize it into 3 challenges that are intrinsically linked to each other. One is fighting climate change. The other is preserving natural capital. And very importantly, and not to be forgotten, and you also mentioned it in your initial words, inclusive growth, to make the entire effort sustainable as well. Otherwise, we're going to falter. All three of those require massive investments to the tune of trillions of dollars per year. Just climate change, it's nearly 10 trillion per year on average from here till the year 2050. So it's 3 decades of around 8% of GDP investments just for that one challenge. And the others require trillions as well. Preserving natural capital, there's estimates from 2.5 to 3 trillion per year over the next decade. Similarly, for inclusive growth, we would need to increase the consumption levels of the almost 5 billion people who are below the economic empowerment line. We would need to increase their consumption by around 37 trillion. So massive numbers, and this is the challenges that we face that require so much investment. How is BBVA responding to it? Just to finish off, we not only have embedded sustainability in our strategy, like Eric was saying, many institutions have done. We have actually put it at the cornerstone, in the frontispiece of our strategy. It is one of the key priorities, the most important priority that we have. And that has translated already into tangible action. Mobilizing sustainable finance. We have already changed our goal twice. It was an original 100 billion mobilization in a 5-year period. In that same period, now our goal is not 100 billion, it's 300 billion up to 2025. And we are already at 170 billion, so 169. So already 70% above what our original target was. Secondly, we have, as signatories to net zero, we have published intermediate targets to 2030 in the highest emitting sectors. We haven't finished yet, there's some more to come, but we do have some quite aggressive targets in the highest emitting sectors. And what's more important, we have sectorial plans to abate emissions, help our clients through investments and to transition themselves. We are also heavy disclosures, and we improve every year. We already published our 4th TCFD report, which actually serves as our initial transition plan following GFAN's guidelines. But we will be improving on disclosure as also our clients get better and we can disclose better. We have transformed on the governance side our organization, many of the things Eric was saying in terms of pushing organizationally for this, including incentives, including variable compensation of everyone that works at BBVA, that we have incorporated the mobilizing sustainable finance into the variable compensation. And of course, working together with other stakeholders, like what we're doing here today. We have been with Tony driving a lot of the efforts, but we have been working together with other stakeholders to try to develop methodologies, to try to develop standards, to try to share best practices. And again, I would like to thank UNEP and UNEP FI in particular for the great efforts in this respect. Also, the GFANS and Net Banking Alliance, in particular, for all their great work. There's much more to do, but in a nutshell, those would be my comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a tremendous shift in strategic priorities. So, José, for CaixaBank, how do you see sustainability?
Well, first of all, congratulations, because your pronunciation of my surname has been superb. Having said that, well, welcome. Thank you very much for your invitation. And of course, I would like to welcome everybody here and to thank the organization for organizing this event here in Madrid. Perhaps in this first question, because I suppose that afterwards we are going to talk about the different transition plans and so on, I would like to focus in a more general view. And the first thing that I would like to emphasize is that we are going to talk a lot about regulation, we are to talk a lot about legal framework and so on. But for companies, for excellent companies, the objective is not to follow the regulation or to follow the legislation framework. The idea is to follow the needs and the trends that we are seeing in the society. Good companies do that. I mean, and in fact, is a way to be very fast. if you rely on legislation or in the framework, the regulation is always lag behind the social trends, and so you will go always late. Having said that, I believe that ESH and this organization is a very clear example of that. In fact, when you analyze the evolution of the insurance company, of the banks, we have seen in the last years that we are taking initiatives before the legislation is in place. And in fact, we are doing that at that moment. The thing that we are doing, in fact, is to listen to the society. And the society is asking us for three things: better corporate governance, second, social involvement, and third, climate involvement. And talking about this third point, and talking about the European Union, I think that we have a big level of ambition, and I think that we are doing things properly. We are leading many fronts. But we have to take into consideration that we are in a turning point, in my opinion. We are shifting from a political momentum to a momentum in which procedures are going to be key. We have been working in concepts, but we have to work in details, in procedures. And that is not easy. That is not easy because we have to do two things at the same time. First, finish with the framework. We have been working, and we have advances in our framework in terms of taxonomies and so on, but we have to complete it. And second, at the same time, we have to implement the initiatives that we have now with a clear legislative definition. Looking ahead, I think that there are 3 points that for me are extremely relevant. First, the definition, as I said before, of a framework that has to have two characteristics. First, to be flexible and agile, because in the implementation process, we are going to find problems, and it's necessary to have the flexibility in order to cope with these problems. And this framework must be coherent. I am not going to say the same, but it has to be coherent in the different parts of the world. The second challenge that we have in front of us, and Carlos was mentioning it, is data quality and reporting. Our data quality and our reporting now are very poor. And the third point that for me is very important, we are not talking only about climate. The third point that for me is very important is that in terms of social taxonomy, we are lagging behind. And I believe that that is going to be a challenge, a very important challenge for us in the future.
Thank you, José. So, Antonio, for MAPFRE, what do you see as the key sustainability considerations? And José mentioned that it's now moving from ambition to delivering on these plans. Please.
Yeah, first of all, thanks to UNEP FI for inviting us to be part of this panel with these relevant financial leaders. I'd like to recognize first the words of the Vice President Rivera, talking a lot about insurance, about the role of insurance related with sustainability. It's important. Sustainability has been always linked with insurance because our activity is based basically to analyze, to mitigate, to compensate risk, mainly associated with climate, with social and other governance issues. So it's important. We are a proud part of the UNEP Association, global think tank, which motto is precisely saying that insurance for a better world. So even doing well our business, it could be enough, but it's not. It's not. We know that we have to protect people. Unfortunately, where there is not insurance, we can find only poverty, lack of inclusion, lack of social and economic development. And so for that reason, it's not enough. We should do more as insurers to improve the standard of living of the people, working not only with shareholders, which is good, with employees, with customers, with other stakeholders. It's always important to work with the society at the whole. One important concern in insurance is inclusion. We have a direct correlation between inclusion and social and economic development. As you probably know, MAPFRE is the leading international group in Latin America, so we know well these geographies, these countries, and we observe many differences. We talk about Latin America as a whole. It's not. There are many countries, even inside each country, there are a lot of differences in terms of social and economic development. For that reason, we need to adequate our messages, we need to adequate our actions to help them. Even having a region which is really affected by natural catastrophes and other important events, where we are not able to distribute insurance. We only can find out poverty, and we need to apply the other concept that is good for a need, but is not sustainable, charity. And we are not accepting the charity as the way to solve the problems of these people. For that reason, we need to accelerate inclusion in all the emerging countries, even in Europe, region where there is still enough room to improve the insurance penetration to protect people. Our strategy is based on people. We are always talking about people because we are acting for people. Because if we protect environment, we are protecting people. But we have a vision, an intergenerational vision, in order to help people, taking into account or caring all the generations to make a fair transition. That's why we say that the transition has to be fair for each generation, because we have to serve our business and conduct our activities in an ethical and transparent manner, seeking all the efforts to put more focus on the S of social. MAPFRE believes strongly in people. We have been defined ourselves as people who take care of people, so it's very relevant. Our very reason for being, our corporate purpose, is to be close to people, accompanying them to move forward with peace of mind, contributing to the development of a more sustainable and supportive society. So that's why we are here. We sum it all up in a new claim that we are using now, that we care about what matters to you. To end this first intervention, I'd like to put focus on the main corporate goals related to our sustainability plan. First, to eliminate definitely the gender pay gap. Secondly, to prioritize the hiring of people with disabilities until we reach globally more than 3.5% of the total workforce. Even we are going to increase this objective when we will achieve it. The third one is to validate 100% of our thousands of service providers. We think that SMEs are very important in the transition to help the whole society to make a good transition. Fourthly, to be carbon neutral by 2030 in the entire group globally. And finally, to reach almost 90% of our investment portfolio by ESG criteria.
Thank you. That's quite a range of issues to address, and sustainability risks and opportunities. So Anna, for Santander, what are the strategic sustainability priorities?
Thank you. It's great to be here. And if I may, I'd just like to start first what I believe is the key task we all have ahead. And that is green growth. And I think those are two very important words. We will not green society, we will not make society and companies green if we don't have growth. And that is especially important. Carlos gave some numbers. We need the financial sector to be able to finance the transition from brown to green. And I think that's one of the things we're not focusing enough on. We have customers that are very big and have lots of resources. We have customers that are small, even in Europe, even in Spain, that cannot afford it. So, we need to be able to finance the transition from brown to green. And that means we need growth. So that is really my high-level observation. For Santander, and again, every company needs to frame sustainability in the context of what the company is there for. Why do we exist? In the case of Santander, we've defined our mission as being helping people and companies prosper, and to do that in a way that is simple, personal, and fair. And that is the way we frame our sustainability. And of course, we need to do this, and let's remember that we need to deliver for our team, for our customers, of course, for our shareholders, and for society. And so in the context of a company that has 165 million customers, 165 million customers in both Europe and the Americas, this is really how we think about green finance. We're one of the banks for the last 15 years, largest in the world in terms of renewable financing. We also have set very ambitious targets for financial inclusion. We set a target of 10 million people in 4 years. We reached 11 million last year. We've increased that to 15 million. And again, we need inclusive growth. That means countries that are not developed like we are in Europe. In terms of the more specific priorities, I think for all of us, I think there's 3 really important things. One is that this transition from brown to green has to be affordable and has to be reliable, i.e. secure. Again, this has huge implications. Affordable means that we need to do much more than just get companies to have ESG goals, okay? Affordable and secure. It means we're going to have to depend on fossil fuels for some time. It means that we need to be able to finance you when you want to install solar panels, but we still need that financing. The second thing is that we need governments to set transition plans. They need to have a strategy for the grid, for tax incentives, et cetera, because without that affordability is not going to happen. And I guess my third observation, which we focus sometimes too little on, and again, Carlos has mentioned that because the world is growing. It's going to grow a lot less. That's a problem, but it's growing. There's a lot of people and countries that want to be better off, that don't have a house, a home. So asking European banks to finance a green mortgage in a remote part of Brazil is not realistic. So again, demand, addressing the demand side of the equation. We talk a lot about supply, but demand is equally important. There will be more demand. There will be more demand for fossil fuels. If you look at what's happened with gas in Europe in the last 10 years, European investment in gas has gone like this. Russian investment in gas has gone like that. Is that something we want? So again, the demand side of the equation is incredibly important. It's not just the supply. And that means that, again, there's going to be more people in the world. There's going to be more demand, higher per capita demand. So we do need a plan to share best practices and have efficiency plans on demand. So those are the 3 things I would say we need.
Thank you. So you mentioned the importance of the transition from brown or from grey to green economy. And José, you already mentioned that the delivery is starting to bump into some of the challenges. So how do you think we can transition to a sustainable, inclusive economy, and how are you supporting this?
Well, the first question that comes to my mind talking about that is that we are talking here, the banking system, but the banking system, the banking sector, is a very low polluting sector. In fact, in CaixaBank, we are carbon neutral from 2018. And the question is, why are we talking about that in a banking session? I think that the reason is very clear. What is our role? Our role is to help our customers. That's our role. I mean, the thing that we have to do is to be with our customers, help them in the transition period, and finance their needs. And it's very easy to say that. I mean, you can say that in 20 seconds. But to put that into practice is a very complex situation. And we all are affording this question. And I say that is a difficult situation because that affects to many aspects of the banking activities. Affects the corporate governance, affects clearly our day-to-day operations, and affects the way in which we make the admission process of risk. Let me start with corporate governance. In our case, and I am sure that in the rest of the big banks is the same, we have changed a lot in the last couple of years. We have organized a very strong the sustainable department. The head of the sustainable department is part of the management committee. We have changed the commissions of our boards, and we have changed the agenda of our boards. And that is extremely relevant. We are changing our policies in terms of retribution, and we are changing our policies in terms of relationship with our stakeholders. The second point that is very clearly affected is strategy. Sustainability is part of our strategy. In fact, in our current strategic plan, we have three vectors, and one of them is sustainability. We are aiming to be a benchmark in terms of sustainability in Europe. And the third point is day-to-day operations. That is not easy because sustainability affects to everything, affects to our systems, our technological platforms, because we need to incorporate new figures and new data, affects to our products, to our services, and affects to our scorings, and all the procedures in terms of granting loans. And that is a big change. A big change for what? A big change in order to be close to our customers. And talking about our customer and the activities of our customer, I would differentiate 4 points. First one is related to the support companies financing in their transition period. And here, we in CaixaBank, we are being very, very active. In fact, we are mobilizing in 64 billion euros in sustainable finance in the period of our current strategic plan. But we are very active in helping our customer in the process of green issuance business. And as an example, last year, for example, we were the first EMEA bank in green finance. We are building up capabilities in terms of advising our customers for the definition of the strategy or for the definition of the positioning of them. We are very active in retail banking. And here, basically, we are talking about mobility, and we are, on the one hand, and we are talking about energy efficiency in homes on the second hand. That's very important because if you consider that in Spain, 6% of the carbon emission comes from houses, and it's very important to help them and to finance them in order to improve their efficiency. Last year, for example, we granted more than 1.5 billion in green mortgages. The third point is that we are not only a bank, we are a group. And in fact, in the CaixaBank group, we have the biggest insurance company of Spain, and we have the biggest asset management company of Spain. And that means that we have to change. We are changing the criteria of investment. And from this point of view, we can say that nowadays, 1/3 of our investment fund and 50% of our pension funds are managed referring to sustainable objective according to the articles 8 and 9 of SFRD. And finally, we are very active issuing green and social debt. In fact, in the period between 2019 and 2022, we have been the European bank with the biggest level of emission. And that is very important, but when you look ahead and you look to the future, again, we have tremendous challenges. And I would like to emphasize the challenge, as Carlos and Anna said before, the amount of money that we have to move. That is a tremendous challenge. And the second challenge is the innovation. We need innovation because otherwise we are not going to meet the objectives that we have. And again, we need a coherent framework in the world. And of course, we need a clear pedagogic effort with our society. Our society has to know that to grow in a green way means two things. First, that we have to change our habits. Second, that is going to cost us. And to play with the expectation of our citizens is extremely important. And I think that it's very important to convey the message that is going to be a great opportunity to improve our world. But that has a cost. And having said that, perhaps I have been talking too much about challenges, but I believe that it's very relevant to say that behind the challenges we have tremendous opportunities, not only for the society, but for the banking system as well. If we can manage the situation, if we are able to manage the situation, are tremendous opportunities from a business point of view.
Thank you. So you mentioned also the social challenges, and Antonio, you also referred a lot to the risks and opportunities with society. So a just transition or a fair transition, you highlighted as well. How do you see the role of investment and insurance in supporting this transition for a sustainable, inclusive economy?
Yes, as I said before, insurance is extremely connected with all the ESG criteria. No? For that reason, it's easier to talk about climate, about social and governance issues, because we do that underwriting policies every day, paying our claims, or even managing our investments. Before the panel, we were talking with Vice President Rivera about the difficulties to have affordable insurance products in some markets. And it's true. Insurance companies don't have infinite financial capacity to do that. For that reason, we need the collaboration, we need partnerships, public and private alliances to do that in order to have affordable products. She noted that in Dominican Republic or other Caribbean countries, it's difficult to insure the climate event. It's true. MAPFRE does that in those markets, but we need the collaboration of the authorities of the other international organizations and even the banks to finance and to find out the right price to do that. Consequently, MAPFRE and in general the insurance sector is committed doing our activity to relieve the society with some issues, important issues, and to help with the cat events and other situations that can affect the social development. We are doing that every day. I can give you some example. For example, many times we go beyond market demands or even regulators' requirements in terms of products and services. We have developed new products in many markets worldwide, trying to have a more sustainable economic activities. For example, in terms of mobility, new policies for electric cars, or in terms of problem with reforestation, we have insurance to protect these activities. So even the agricultural insurance activity, natural activity for many countries, are very important for the social development. And in Spain and, for example, in Brazil, we are the leading group writing these policies. Even we work with companies that we insuring and we investing because we think that they are on the right track, achieving decarbonization and reaching a fair energy transition for everyone. We want to help our customers. Finally, I would like to talk about ESG investment. For example, we promote these sustainable investments. We are a huge insurance industry is a huge investor in public and private assets, and we are offering to our customers, for example, new products. For example, the funds based on sustainability. For example, Capital Responsible Fund, which invests in companies that are committed with the hiring of people with disabilities. By the way, these companies are usually more profitable than the average, so it's even profitable for our customers. But we are working on these other activities, creating, for example, collaborating with the energy transition, with funds related with renewables energy. And recently we have just launched in Spain a new fund, biomethane fund, which is very, very relevant, a new one to create new sources of energy, but as well is very committed with the social development in the part of our country less developed, because it's creating social value in these rural areas in Spain.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Antonio. You mentioned decarbonization, and of course, the scale of finance for climate action is tremendous, both with changing business models and also innovation with the technologies needed. So, Carlos, could you tell us how can the industry really reach the financing, the massive level of investment needed for deploying existing proven technologies, but also financing the innovation for new technologies to achieve net zero?
Yeah. Well, first I would say, before we get into the financing, that what we need is the investment to be happening, and then we can finance that. I think these are points that were made by Ana and José Ignacio as well. So it'd be great if we could go like this, and the world would function without emissions, but it's not that easy, because we need to find ways and then deploy those ways to move around without emissions, to build bridges and homes and roads without emissions, to grow our food without emissions, and so on. So we need a radical transformation of the way society works. And it's not going to happen out of charity. It was already mentioned by Antonio. It's not going to happen if the numbers don't add up. We need the massive investment that we were talking about. It's to change, to do that radical change in society, and the investment is not going to happen if it does not make economic sense. So the most relevant or the most impactful or the only, I would say, way for us to decarbonize is to ensure that the investments make economic sense so we can scale. Otherwise, public money or charity money or philanthropy is not going to make it. And the numbers need to make sense, not for the banks. The numbers need to make sense for those doing the investment. And those doing the investment are, first of all, today's emitters, because they are the ones that need to transform. So we need to not shy away from today's emitters, but finance them to support their transition. And oftentimes we find we get criticized when we engage with today's emitters, and we have transition plans with them, because this will take time, and we get criticized. So I would vouch for the opposite, supporting today's emitters who are the ones that need to invest, and then other players who, when numbers add up, including citizens, so investors, citizens, companies, corporates, they're not going to change their behavior. They're not going to, unless the numbers make sense. So anyway, that would be my most important point to mainstream sustainable finance. We are only the middleman. We're very important, but we're not the ones doing the investment. If there is not an actor who wants to invest, and that depends on really an economic equation, then there's nothing to finance. Now, in terms of how I think about then financing when the numbers start to make sense, I would see technologies where the numbers work quite well already. In energy efficiency, it's the case, particularly with high energy prices. In a lot of the applications, both industrial and residential. Mobility, it's the case. In power, it's the case in many instances. In those areas, what we need is public policy that supports and expands the application of those technologies where the space in which it makes economic sense. I think carbon pricing would go a long way. Also permitting, faster permitting, so that we can deploy we need to triple our renewables in the decade, the rate at which we're building. So permitting is essential. It's taking now up to 10 years for some utility scale projects, and we need to bring that down to 3 or 4. Then we have a second group where technology is still not ripe. It exists, so we can manufacture steel or cement without emissions, but the numbers are nowhere to be seen. Or carbon capture is another good example. We know how to do it technologically in the lab, but it's way too expensive. And here what we need is to scale it, and incentives from the public side will be important. The good news is that both in the US and in Europe, both sides of the Atlantic, there's this big push to precisely drive forward innovation. And the good news is also we're seeing a wave of innovation, bringing solutions around all of those areas. We at BBVA, we're investing in, so far we have announced 5 funds that invest in green tech. We view that as one way to support and also get know-how and also good returns. So the funds like Just Climate or Lower Carbon or HY24, Fifth Wall, Suma. So these are funds where we put a bit of our money to play, also to support, but we need some public support. And then there's the third, harder problems or research, I would say, research areas where there is where really we need, given the longer term horizons like in nuclear fusion or in aviation, hydrogen-based planes or things like that, where the public sector involvement would be even more important to drive those research. So in sum, we need to invest that. We need the numbers to add up. And in order to do that, policy will be important. And also today's emitters are the ones who are going to be doing the transition. So let's support them and not shy away from them. I think those will be my most important points on financing the transition.
Thank you.
Thank you, Liesel.
So yeah, I understand the policy changes that are needed for the economic incentives and for the business case to make sense for uptake of these technologies is critical. And of course, we've also seen a lot of developments on the sustainable finance policy side. So Anna, what do you see as the role of regulators in making sure that sustainable finance can grow at the pace and scale needed?
So regulators have a huge role in a sector like finance where we are very highly regulated. At the end, how much capital we have available to lend, including for green, depends on the rules on capital. I always say, if you think about, and there's a lot of talk about this these days, where does Santander makes its money? If you take pre-tax, we make 1/3 in Europe, 1/3 in North America, 1/3 in South America. Where does that money go to? 1/3 to additional lending, 1/3 to pay taxes, 1/3 to pay taxes, and 1/3 to shareholders. So the equation and the math is very simple. If regulators give us a capital add-on because we don't have enough green assets, there will be less lending. Less lending means less green finance, less brown to green finance. So I think the key point for regulators is what I said at the beginning. We need green growth. There is no way we can go green if there is no growth. This is really important. And by the way, regulators' role is not, the mandate is not growth, it's to keep us safe, which is fine, but to be safe, we need to be profitable because that's the way we can then finance. So I would say that is the really key point for regulators. And regulators have a political role because they're deciding where capital goes in the economy by regulating us, the banks. And that's something people sometimes don't really, look at. And I think we all need to make sure we do think about that. A few things about regulators. First, I heard that was discussed before. So for us to get from brown to green, we need to measure progress. To measure progress, we need global frameworks. There's been a huge progress. So the ISSB in Frankfurt is now interoperable. It's a big word with the European framework. It still means there's two, okay? Well, two and many others, but let's say two big ones in Europe. So that interoperability is key. It's great news, but we need more, okay? We need a global approach to measuring what is brown, what is green, and where we are on a journey. My second point is that, and I've made it before, it's a big mistake, and it's not going to help us to have, for example, a green asset ratio. If you tell any bank in the world to split your lending into green and brown, we're never going to brown the green. We're all going to want to be good in the picture. Well, at least that's a risk. And so just measuring green and brown is, in my view, not a good idea. It's not a good idea to have capital add-ons for green finance. I do think there's a lot of capital for green when it makes economic sense. We need much more capital to go from brown to green. And so this is really important. So that is one big point, the measurement, global approach, and making sure the taxonomies are built in the right way so we can compare apples to apples. The second big one is developing economies. We've said it before. Again, if we in Europe is a rich continent, we have a lot of savings. There's banks like BBVA or ourselves, but others that finance developing economies. We need to consider that, and the regulators need to consider that. They cannot expect European banks to be the police of climate. You know, countries are the ones that have to set the transition plans. We need to be able to finance the transition in Mexico, Brazil, or Africa, other countries. And so I think that is really important. As regulators think about the frameworks, that they think about the different starting point of developing economies. And then, of course, they need to, regulators need to understand that businesses, we are in an emergency. It's an urgent task we all have. If we keep on asking companies, and again, we always think of the big ones, but 90%, 80% of our economies are small and medium-sized companies. If we keep on asking them for new ways to report or new regulation, we're going to lose the battle. So we need clarity and focus. We need to realize we're in an emergency, and we need to realize that all these rules are being applied not by only the big companies or the big banks, it's by many millions of small companies. And my last point is, again, people. We need governments to have clear, fact-based, when I mean fact-based, I mean really understanding supply and demand for energy. Where do we need still gas and gas investments? But they need to bring people along. And for that, we need governments to have, again, as I said, we need policies from governments, and that is the basis for regulators then to come to us. Otherwise, we're not going to solve the issue. So again, it's a complex problem. I just want to stress that governments have a big role.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Anna. You mentioned the importance also of not only measuring the brown and green, but also the transition finance aspect. And of course, with social taxonomies often lagging behind the green taxonomies, there is the risk of growing inequalities as an unintended consequence alongside the transition. So, Jose, could you tell us how are you mitigating these risks of these effects, social inequalities?
Very, very important question, really, very important question, because it's true that we are living in a world in which, as we are saying, we are seeing tremendous changes, and changes which are big and very fast. And these changes has a clear influence on people and a clear impact on communities. As the result, at least in the short term, always innovation in the short term brings inequality. And that has been the case, and that is the case that we are living now. Inequality is a very important question for a society, because inequality jeopardizes the social cohesion of a country. Social cohesion is an intangible, but is a very important asset. Social cohesion is not in our GDP, is not in our income, but is absolutely key for the quality of life and well-being of the countries. And I am sure that people here, some of you, I'm sure that you have been living in countries without this social cohesion, and the quality of life is very, very poor. From this point of view, for us in CaixaBank, part of our DNA is to fight for social cohesion. And it's part of our DNA because we have the history of the saving banks. We are the addition of more than 100 saving banks. And in terms of social cohesion, we are fighting basically in two chapters. The first one refers to inclusion, and the second one refers to social action. And when we are talking about inclusion, we are talking about two sorts of inclusion: geographical inclusion and financial inclusion. Geographical inclusion is very important for Spain. Spain has one of the lowest population density of Europe. And in fact, we have many areas, many regions that are at risk of depopulation. It's the part of Spain that we call empty Spain. And that has a tremendous influence from a social point of view, because this part of the country cannot have social services. From this point of view, we have a clear commitment to be very close to this population, starting with our branch network. We have the largest branch network in Spain, but 50% of our branches are in rural areas. And in fact, we have a clear commitment. When we made the merger between Bankia and CaixaBank, we committed with the society not to close any branch in which we are the only bank in the town. And from a point of view of innovation, we have a fleet of mobile branches that is serving nowadays more than 300,000 people. 70% of them are older than 70 years old. And that's for us, is part of our strategy. It's not only a message, it's part of our strategy. The second question is referred to financial inclusion. And in financial inclusion, I would like to differentiate two vectors. First, which is very important, is the normal activity. It's the normal activity that any banks have, and I believe that is necessary to say that that is very important for the financial inclusion. But on top of that, in the case of CaixaBank, in the year 2007, we created Microbank. Microbank is devoted to microfinance. And Microbank now is the largest European microfinance bank, which is very important. In this year, we have provided more than 9 billion euros to more than 1 million vulnerable families, and not only vulnerable families, but we have granted loans as well to almost 240,000 micro enterprises and self-employed workers. Microbank is a business case. It's an incredible experience. It's an incredible experience because we are providing these grants, this credit and these loans. We are providing with fixed rates, with personal guarantees, and in spite of the fact that we are targeting vulnerable people, the default rate is very low, and the profitability that we have give us a very clear, stable project. So inclusion is one of our vectors. The other vectors I was talking about was social action. And here we have many, but I would like to emphasize two because are very important for the Spanish society. The Spanish society has many, of course, but two questions that has to be tackled. First, the level of unemployment in the young people. And from this point of view, we are talking about employability. And employability means to have the skills in order to incorporate the labor market. From this point of view, 6 years ago, we decided to create Fundación Dualiza, which has only and just one objective, the objective of make possible a big improvement in Spain of the vocational training. We have been working with more than 25,000 students. We have been working with more than 2,000 schools of vocational training. The second question is housing, not only in Spain, but in many parts of Europe. And talking about housing, we have more than 10,500 social houses in which are rents that we subsidize for vulnerable people. And I believe that is another important question. The third point related to CaixaBank is not only about inclusion, only about social action, but the third point is about the characteristic of our shareholder structure. In our shareholder structure, we have 30% of our capital is owned by La Fundación La Caixa, which is one of the largest foundations in Europe and is devoted to social cohesion, basically. Last year, we could benefit the foundation through 500 million euros that we paid them through the dividends that we had in the bank. And that means that when we are talking about CaixaBank, we are talking about the cohesion, the social cohesion and our strategy. That means that we are talking about a bank that we have a clearly different model of banking and a model by which we are very, very proud of developing it.
Thank you. This is access to finance is really one of the targets embedded in the Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, access to insurance is also important. So we are running short of time. So in 1 minute, Antonio, could you explain how MAPFRE is addressing social issues, then financial inclusion, closing the protection gap, etc.? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's easier because I have already explained how insurance plays an excellent and relevant role protecting people and helping to reduce the lack of inclusion, trying to closing the inequality gaps. I would like to say that even doing well our business is not enough. I started today saying that. So for that reason, MAPFRE is highly proud having an extraordinary foundation, MAPFRE Foundation, which has more than 3 billion euros invested, and it plays a relevant role in more than 30 countries every day in terms of working with vulnerable people, accident prevention, road safety, health, silver economy, and the last but not least, culture. It's very important, and we try to help every day people living on these areas to recover as fast as they can to reach a higher standard of living. Nevertheless, it's not enough. We don't have unlimited resources, as I said, and there are many cat events and other issues that affect a lot at these people. But we have to work more on that, trying to mainly Latin America, our preferred region with emerging countries, where we can do more, and we are trying to do. But we have reached great advantages in these areas, like inclusion, gender equality, diversity, anti-corruption policies, and even environmental protection, among others. And we maintain these strategic goals, both in MAPFRE Foundation and the insurance group, trying to reach better objectives. In terms of gender equality, for example, 42% of our employees, of our senior executive position, are on hands of women, very important. And our board, our global board, 47% of the total members are women. So we are closer to the full equality. And regarding talent, I can say that, for example, to take advantage of the senior talent, we have launched a project, the aging project, trying to get the most out of the senior talent added to the value of the company. So we are doing many things on track, and we are very happy reaching new objectives every year.
Fantastic. You mentioned emerging markets, and we've already highlighted some of the challenges, but Anna, do you really think that the approach to sustainable finance today is really having the impact we want in developing countries and emerging markets?
So the simple answer is no. And we have a lot more work to do. I mentioned some of the points, and others have done that also. But there can be no transition to green if there's no growth. People in developing countries want to buy a new house. They're not going to be able to buy a green home if there's no finance. This is a huge task. It's really, we're not even close. So I do think that we need to focus a lot more on growth. The second point would be that, and I've made this a couple of times again, but countries, including developing countries, need transition plans. This is government responsibility. We don't have that. Very few countries, I think Japan has one more or less, but very few countries have a country transition plan. The energy grid, a lot of that depends on government and regulation and incentives. That has to be addressed. Because as has been said, the big emitters are many of the energy companies that have transition plans, but the grids are not being upgraded. If you cannot install solar panels because there's no capacity in the grid, and by the way, that happens in Spain, let alone developing countries, we ain't going to get there. So I think that is really, really important. And again, because my third point, and Larry Summers wrote a great article with Bono, by the way, in the Washington Post this weekend, I think, we need to reform the MBDs because that can mobilize billions and billions of capital. Everybody talks about it, but we haven't done it. Okay, so mobilizing, governments have a lot of debt. You only need to look at the numbers. If we don't mobilize private capital, we're not going to make it. And we're not doing enough on that, and developing countries are very much forgotten because, obviously they start from way behind. So first they need growth, and then we can give them green growth. If we want to do both at the same time, we need the multilateral institutions, and there's a big reform there that has not happened yet.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think there definitely are movements underway to have the international financial architecture reforms. So let's hope that they pick up the pace too. Carlos, how else can we scale up the sustainable finance in low-income and middle-income countries?
Well, first I would make the acknowledgement that we need these countries if we are to decarbonize. It's very clear and obvious, but sometimes forgotten by the developing world. We need them. It should be top of their agenda. But I agree with Anna that we're not doing enough, and it's not top of their agenda. It should be because they are actually at high risk. So it's for a protection reason, it should be top of their agenda. Also because they have big opportunity to invest in natural-based solutions, for example, projects that are quite attractive from an economic standpoint. So it should be top of their agenda also to seize the opportunity and also to leapfrog in their development beyond the legacy technologies that we have in the developed world. So for all those reasons, it should be top of their agenda, but it's not, because they have other pressing needs, and I was referring to some. So you need housing, you need health, you need education, and the investments required, which are tremendous, in the trillions again. In fact, there were some numbers in the G20 leaders' declaration in New Delhi recently, and the numbers are staggering. They're talking only in energy, in emerging markets, you need 4 trillion per annum by the end of the decade. And if you include other things, it's closer to 6 trillion. Where's all that money going to come from? Well, it can only come from one place, which is the developed world. And we better put it there, otherwise we're not going to do it. Now, some ideas. First, very simple. Remember in COP15 in Copenhagen in 2009, there was a commitment from the developed countries to channel 100 billion per year in sustainable finance. Well, It might happen in 23, 3 years later. So we're 3 years late on a number that is way too low. So we need to multiply, we need to deliver on the 100 billion and multiply that number manyfold. Then foster country platforms. I think this could be a good way to speed up in certain countries. Examples are the Just Energy Transition Partnerships in Vietnam, Indonesia, South Africa. Hopefully we'll see some in South America, maybe Colombia. In Colombia, there is also a Climate Finance Leadership Initiative that we co-chair with other local players, led by Bloomberg. Those type of country platforms, I think, can go a long way to put together the stakeholders, the players in each of those countries, and try to come up with plans that speed up their decarbonization. Blended finance, exactly the point that Anna was making on the multilaterals. Also, I was glad to see in the G20 leaders' declaration that they are again seconding or backing the new mandate for the World Bank to increase concessional finance and play a role there. I believe here that managing the risk is the key element. We have a lot of attractive projects. If they were to happen in the developed world, there'll be easy financing, but we have the country risk, political, regulatory, currency. I think that is a place for concessional finance to kick in and cover those risks. And the private actors can take on the project risk, the same they take it on in the developed world. So those would be some of my ideas.
Thank you. Definitely pressing issues, but we also pressed on time. So I think we're actually out of time. So thank you so much. And
you've done a pretty good job, though.
So you've heard about the main challenges and some of the biggest opportunities. And please thank our panelists.
Thank you.